Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disc and Dice podcast. This is episode number 43. My name is Paul, and today I am here with just one other person, who is Timmy. How you going?
Hey, I am very well. But yes, we've got no JT with us today.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There's a bit of a backstory to it. Why he's not here. He probably doesn't want us to talk about it on the podcast, but I think it's only right that we tell people that he has been arrested, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's not clear whether he'll ever be on the podcast again, considering the severity of the crimes. We can't talk about them for legal reasons, but yeah, this might be it for his time on the Disc and Dice podcast.
Only time will tell. We wish him the best, but you know what? At least he'll have some time to look inward and really think about his actions.
That's true. And, if he does end up spending some time in jail, I don't know what kind of stuff you get access to there, but maybe he could even listen to the episode that he's not on. But that's probably unlikely.
There you go. Little something to pass the time. God knows he'll have enough of it.
So yeah, it's a two-man show today. But we plow ahead as normal. Regular listeners would have also noticed that we're a week late with this episode. Our schedules didn't really line up last week.
It was also JT's fault.
That is true.
We delayed a week for him, and then he couldn't do it anyway. So thanks, bud.
So yeah, that's the reason why we're a week late here. But we do our best, and we're here at some point talking about games, which is what we do.
Absolutely.
And in terms of games, we've kind of got a bit of a variety of stuff today. We've kind of talked in our group chat and in our Discord channel, little plug for that we don't really talk about the tabletop and board game stuff as much as we'd probably like to. So we've got a bit of that later on in the show. But
yeah, the world's a crazy place, and so getting together with people has been a bit difficult the last few months. So we've kind of been forced to neglect the dice part of Disc and Dice, haven't we? But you know what? Not for lack of trying, and we've got some more for you this week.
Right, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I was going to mention the global pandemic being a factor in that as well. Mm-hmm. But we'll get to that. We'll get to the physical games a bit later on. But we're going to kick things off with something that you've been playing, Timmy, which I've been hearing a lot about, but I have not played at all. So I'll let you introduce it.
Well, look, really keen listeners might have heard a very naughty swear word in the background of our last episode, just as we were wrapping up and the music was fading in. And if you did pick up on that, that was because my lovely fiancée Shayla was in the middle of a round of Fall Guys. And this game, for those of you who don't know it, has that real kind of Mario Kart, Mario Party vibe to it, in that it can get quite chaotic and you'll just be screaming at the telly but having the best time. So, essentially, Fall Guys is a battle royale, or it's at least a royale. There's not so much battling in it, but you get dumped into a mini game at random. There are heaps and heaps. I'm not sure how many. I haven't come close to seeing them all yet, I wouldn't imagine. But you get dumped into a cartoon world with 59 other players. So you start with a field of 60 and a simple objective. Normally, the first rounds are kind of like obstacle course style things. So you're these little pudgy cartoon things. And it's, the first 40 people to get to the end of the obstacle course qualify for the next round. Everyone else gets eliminated. It could be something like, the only real obstacle is that there are doors that you have to bash through. And of course, with 60 people trying to get through these doors, it's going to create a squeeze, a funnel, and a traffic jam. You can get knocked over very easy. And when everybody's running over the top of you, you can't get back up again. So it's about, picking your moments to dart forward and trying to keep ahead of everybody. Perhaps this particular level is, more about timing jumps over moving obstacles and stuff like that. Perhaps it's, you're on something circular and there are holes that you have to avoid or you'll fall through the map itself. There's such a wide variety of these things and they're all so much fun and it's just so chaotic. But it is a lot of fun in the same way, like I mentioned, like Mario Kart. Like you could be having the best time and get absolutely messed up by 3 shells in a row. Frustrating as heck, but hey, that's the game and everyone still loves it, right?
So this is only online. Like there's only this kind of 60 player, like you say, kind of battle royale type thing. Like you say, it's not exactly like that, but there's no like single player component to this.
Nah, none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
When you fire up the menu, your options are like, tweaking what your little character looks like, or looking at your progression through the season to see what cool items you're up for getting next. But there's only a single play button. It's not like continue or load or choose your game mode. It's all randomized.
Right. Okay. I guess following on from that, then is this something? Because I'm thinking about the kind of the Mario Kart or maybe like Mario Party sort of analogies here, and I guess I'm thinking, is this something that you can kind of sit down on the couch with, say, like you and Shayla, and the two of you can play Fall Guys, or can only one of you play with 59 online strangers?
Yeah, so it's definitely one player per console or PC or whatever.
Right.
But it's actually a great spectator sport. Like Shayla and I have intentionally had nights where we're just swapping the controller backwards and forwards, having a beer or whatever, just hanging out, and you can just play for hours because, like I said, it's completely random. You're always getting different challenges and courses and maps and stuff. And we got to the point where you can do it one way. You can go, all right, let's see who can stay alive for the longest. And I think I never got past the third round, and Shayla got to about the same because they do get increasingly more difficult. And you can play it competitively, or you can go, oh, you know what I'm actually going to do is I'm really good at this first one that's just come up. This is my specialty course, but this next one, that's all you kind of thing.
That's cool. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's like I was saying before the podcast, like I'm really keen to talk about this game because it's really good and I do want to spruik it a little bit. But at the same time, it's cartoony, it's these obstacle courses, and I don't think it's like going to be super interesting for me to sit here and explain how every single one of the obstacle courses works. But, just to give you a feel for like how different some of them are, I've mentioned kind of the get to the end, be one of the first to do it, and you qualify and the kind of obstacles in the way. But there are some other games as well. Like I've only got it once, but I got to play one where they kind of set you up on like a giant oversized football field and split everyone into 2 teams. And there were like countless balls on the field, and you just had to like use your body to shove these balls into your opponent's goal. And whoever got the most goals, the entire other team got eliminated. And so that was a bit of different fun,
That sounds a little bit like Rocket League kind of
vibes.
It
had that level did have a real Rocket League vibe about it. That's a really good descriptor. The other one that is a little bit different is you're standing on these tiles which are like floating in the air, and they're flashing images on them. So like the one I'm standing on is flashing a grape, but I can see the one next to me is showing up a banana, and the one on the other side is an orange. And then when there's like after like 10 seconds, a screen around you will show an orange. So I know I have to get to an orange one because all the other pieces are going to fall away. And that's just going to keep going until enough players have been eliminated. So that's kind of the vibe you're looking at. It is very much a silly party game. What I think you were leading to, Paul, is that I feel like this game would be really good if you could have split screen, if you could have a few of you playing it on the one TV, because it is a lot of fun. But for what it is, it's really good fun, even just to watch your mates play it.
Right. Okay. I'm kind of interested in how it gets from 60 to a winner like that. Like, is there a set number of rounds, and there's a set number of people who are eliminated each time? Because some of these, like the way you're describing it, sounds like it could be kind of random. Like the one with the floor falling away, it sounds like you could have a round of that where almost everyone is eliminated or almost no one is, depending on how it goes. Whereas stuff that's like a race, you could kind of you could set the rules and say, oh, just the last 5 are knocked out. So what would you say is a standard kind of length for a round of Fall Guys all the way down to the winner?
I've never gotten all the way down to the winner, and although I could choose to continue watching, I'm much more interested in just giving it another crack myself. So I
Uh-huh.
don't know 100%. I can't really answer your question. Like, you're right in what you're saying. The ones where it's like the first 40 across the finish line qualify. And so you know that 20 people are getting eliminated. And then, the one I was talking about when you're falling through the map, I normally see that in round 2 or 3. And that's normally like, there's maybe like 25 people left and it has to get down to 13. So once 12 people are eliminated. So there are ones like that, but you're right. The ones when you are having to memorize the patterns on the ground and make sure you don't fall into oblivion, it could absolutely eliminate more people than it needs to. I get the impression though that you would just keep going until there was only one person left. And I don't know how much more severely they start dropping people out after the third round. Like I said, I've never made it to the fourth round.
Right, right. Sorry, I might have missed this before, but is it always are the first 3 rounds always the same minigame?
No. Like, I have found that there are certain ones that I only see coming up in the second or third round, and they might be because it's a bit harder.
Right.
But I've also, played games where I've done the same level twice in a row, like
Ah.
like in the one kind of, round 1 and round 2 are the same map, or I have done something in round 1 that I last time did in round 2. So there's a lot of randomness to it, but I do think it appears to me like there is a scale of difficulty that the game is aware of, because there are certain ones that I've never come up against until 2 or 3. But that again could be because they're better for smaller numbers, or they need to eliminate smaller numbers, and you start with 60, so they have like the bigger maps up the front,
Okay. I think I have to ask the question of how far have you got? If you haven't won it before, what's the best you've done, if you remember?
Oh, I've managed to get to the third round and been eliminated.
And so,
So
how many were left, do you reckon?
like 13 people.
Okay, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad, but I mean, like, they eliminate people in big numbers, so
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it sounds like, I like the way it sounds like it has, from the way you're describing it, that chaotic element that a game like Mario Kart does, where the best player doesn't always win because there's kind of so much going on that you can get blue shelled in Mario Kart at just the wrong time and come last. It sounds like maybe a similar kind of thing could happen here, which to me sounds fun.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like, that's kind of where my Mario Kart analogy was coming from, because you can be as good as you want. You can know how to play the game, but there are random changes that you cannot account for. Like, one level that I've played a lot, that was one of the first 40 people through to the end. It's got kind of like it's a big straight map, and there are doors that you have to bash down to get through, but not all of them will actually bash down. So, you start off in your group of 60 and you're facing about 4 doors, and you have to pick which ones you're going to run towards. And if you are near the front and you pick the right one, you'll get through and you'll get a massive head start on everyone else. But if you pick the wrong one, and by the time you've done that, everyone realizes, oh, it's that door there, then it's a traffic jam to get through. So you can have played the game 1,000 times, know this course, what's coming, like, which one is the best one to go through for the quickest line, if the door can be broken down. But they're different every time you play it. It'll never be the same door that you can break down every time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And that sounds cool. Like, it sounds like it's delivering on that thing that I like from Mario Kart.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the kind of game that you can just keep playing, because when you finally do get a new level, it might take you might get eliminated quickly, but you go, I know how to do this one now. Let's go again. Let's see if we can get, because if this level comes up again, we're going to be all right. And so you can just keep playing. It's a lot of fun.
So you said you've only got to the third round, but you've seen like a few of the mini games. Do you have a favorite one? Like, you kind of mentioned before that you can play it by sort of passing the controller around when it's someone's kind of special subject in a way. What's yours? Like, what's the one that when that comes up, Shayla just knows she's got to hand that controller to you?
I think the way we've been doing it more so is that there are ones that we don't like. So
Right, okay.
There's one when everyone is standing on like a big long tube that different sections of the tube rotate at different speeds and in different directions. So if you stand still, you will eventually just get tipped off. But you can keep moving across. But there are like, sometimes the tube will come back around and there's like a wall on it. So you have to get to another part because you're going to get pushed off. You can't just run past it. And Shayla hates that one. So when she sees that one comes up, that one's for me. So I don't mind that one. It is pretty hard. I've got past it like once. um, I really like the one I was describing about memorizing the floor tiles,
Hmm.
and I think just because that's a little less unpredictable, like the chaos comes in. You don't know where you don't know like which fruit is going to come up, and so you need to position yourself somewhere where you can quickly get to whatever does come up, and you have to be spinning that camera around and really trying to memorize the whole floor. But it's not so much I need to squeeze through this door and I have to hope that no one bumps me over kind of thing. Like there's enough space in that one that you can rely on your own memory a little bit more. So that's probably my favorite one.
You mentioned something there which I was going to ask, which is how much you can interfere with other people. So you said like making sure you don't get bumped by someone else. Is that
Mhm.
like a how big a part of it is that? Is that like a viable strategy?
So in this game, you can move, you can jump, and you can grab things. So in most of the games, you want to just steer as clear from people. Well, sorry, in the obstacle course ones, you want to steer as clear from people as possible. But in some of the games, you want to grab them and hold them still so that they can't do things. And sometimes you could even try and push them off. Like when I was doing that memory game one, I learned very quickly that if I knew where I had to be and I got to that tiles that wasn't going to get dropped out, I wanted to make sure that I was in the center of that tile because everybody else is going to be vying for a spot. And if you're on the edge, you can get pushed off. And that can happen accidentally, but some people are playing to win, and I've had people like really trying to push me. you know, um, one of the games, kind of like the soccer one I mentioned, but a little bit different, is there are three teams, and it's kind of like a capture the flag sort of situation. You're trying to get their colored balls and get them into your base, and I realized by watching other people on my team that once we were like way up in the lead, the other people on my team were simply grabbing the other players. So instead of leaving the base and trying to get more balls and being greedy because and leaving ourselves undefended, they were just grabbing the other players so that there weren't enough players that could move freely enough to tip the score in someone else's favor before the end of the round. So
That's
there's a
interesting.
little bit of doing that, but it's not in every game. You kind of have to learn where it's valuable. Like in one of the early obstacle course ones, if I was running down and everyone's trying to get through the door and I've grabbed somebody, that's just stopping me from being able to move quick enough. So you wouldn't do it.
Right, right.
And like you're pretty unstable. You have kind of this weird floaty movement. Like most of the characters kind of look like a beanbag with legs. So you're kind of top heavy and it takes a little while to turn and stuff. So you can fall over very easily.
Is like
So
is there kind of like physicsy stuff that's a part of it particularly?
I reckon there is, yeah. I remember I haven't experienced it myself, but when Shayla first started playing, she unlocked like this big wolf mask that she could put on, and it kind of looked like a stuffed wolf's head. And she felt like it made her too top heavy. She felt like she was falling over way too much. So she immediately took that off, but she left on the wolf tail down the bottom at the back of her because she felt like it stabilized her a little bit more. I haven't messed with that because I took her at her word, and like I said, we're swapping the controller backwards and forwards, so I'm not going to go. No, now I'm putting on my costume, But but yeah, like she felt like that there was physics to that level. I would say like you definitely have a weight to your movement. It's kind of like you're like a toddler. It's like a clumsy baby trying to trying to race to the door of a jumpy castle. Yeah. Also, it would be remiss of me not to mention the music is really, really good in kind of that modern Mario Kart music again. It's like obviously MIDI, but with good samples, and it's kind of like really fast paced and frenetic, and the bass line's incredible. So, yeah, that's a lot of fun too. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it, really. Like, it's a simple concept that gets harder and harder, and really, like, we got it because we just kept hearing about it, and it looks pretty cute, and we saw some people streaming it. But yeah, I'd recommend checking it out if it sounds at all interesting to you.
I got one thing I wanted to ask you, which is not specifically about playing the game. So I guess it kind of makes sense to bring it up here when I think we're about to move on. This, like you say, it's got kind of a battle royale vibe to it, but it also, like you say, it's like Mario Kart. It sounds like it has a lot of almost like Mario, just normal Mario platforming elements in some of these levels and things like that. I'm interested in like what you feel this game is trying to tap into, because battle royales are huge now. Like Fortnite being the obvious main one to mention. Like, is this trying to get a piece of the battle royale money, or is this like a party game that kind of just happens to work like a battle royale as well?
I kind of feel like they've gone, what if we optimize Mario Party for streaming, like for Twitch streamers?
Right.
Because
Okay.
it's only the fun, silly parts of Mario Party. None of this moving around a board and giving yourself power-ups and rolling dice and stuff. It's just mini game after mini game after mini game. It's chaotic, so it's lots of fun. You easily get into it, screaming and stuff. And like, it does stream really well. I think Shayla came across it because like the AFL now invest heavily in promoting streaming, and one of the players from Port Adelaide, which is our team, was streaming this game, and so he was playing it, and we could hear one of his teammates like losing his mind on TeamSpeak, just like yelling and carrying on and stuff. And we were like, well, that seems like fun. So yeah, I think they've gone, party games aren't happening so much anymore. Like, streaming's the thing, online multiplayer is the thing. Let's see if we can't have the best of both worlds.
That's interesting. That's more and more a thing all the time now. I was reading something the other day. I can't remember which developer or publisher it was about, but it was something about them talking about like one of their metrics they were measuring in their games now was watchability. That it's like as important as all the other things. Yeah, how good is this game for streamers to be able to promote? Basically,
when you get eliminated in this game, it just keeps you watching, and like, even at the end of the round, and it shows that your character's been eliminated. Unless you specifically exit, you will just keep watching right through to the very end of it. So they have designed this game to be fun to watch.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that when I asked that question.
Yeah. So yeah, like, it's a bit of fun. If that game, like, it's inexpensive as well. Like, we bought it, and I think it was under $30. It might have been like 25 or something on the PlayStation Store. But yeah, and that's like brand new. I remember the first thing I heard about it was, how like when you become aware of internet outrage because you see more people speaking out against the outrage than the outrage itself. Like, when this game launched, I presume that it had lots of server problems and crashing and stuff, because everyone was going, leave this little indie developer alone. Like, imagine making a game so good that your biggest problem is too many people want to play it, and rah 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 rah. And it seems pretty stable now. You never wait long for a game, and I've been dropped out of maybe one. So that's fine. But yeah, like, worth checking out for sure.
Yeah, like you brought up the kind of streaming thing, so I'm thinking it'll be interesting to see how long a game stays in kind of like the gaming zeitgeist at the moment, because like that stuff moves so fast now. Like the biggest game in the world is gone a week later in a way that it just things just weren't like that a few years ago. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see like where this game is in, I don't know, a few months' time.
Yeah, same. Like, I'm kind of like stoked that I've gotten into it and it's in like season 1, and just like, I never get into any of these seasonal games until like they've been out and they're in season 7 or 8, and I go, I'll give it a shot because everyone seems to be playing it. But yeah, this one, in on the ground floor, keen to see where it goes.
That is always fun to be in at the start, actually. Like with MMOs and stuff like that. It's like, and maybe it's not quite the same kind of thing, but still, I feel like there's something a bit special about being there at the start and seeing, especially with the way games are kind of, live services now, seeing how things change when you're playing it. There's always something kind of cool about being involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about you, man? What have you been getting up to?
Well, I have been playing one of the aforementioned promised non-video games that we're going to talk about on this episode. But it is something we've talked about before. So I've been playing KeyForge, which is a card game, it's not a sort of, but it's a two-player card game.
Yeah. It's definitely a card game.
It's definitely a card game. It's definitely for two players. It's got a lot of similarities to Magic, but sort of has some key differences. And again, we've talked about this, I think, more than once. So we're not gonna recap how KeyForge works if you haven't heard of it. But it's something that we've all enjoyed. Timmy, you and I are probably the ones who've played the most of it out of our little group of gaming friends. But I got into it with JT, actually, our ex-pod member JT, and Moz, who has been a guest a number of times on the podcast. So over the last few weeks with the two of those, I've played a bit of KeyForge. And I kind of have some new thoughts on it. I feel like it's the kind of game that every time I play KeyForge, I realize something else, which is, I think, one of the strengths of it. I think it's got a real sort of easy to play but hard to master, which that's a real cliche, but I think that's much more true for a game like KeyForge than it is for Magic. I think sort of the basic flow of the game is far simpler, and there are far fewer things that you have to keep track of. Like Magic, there's so much stuff. Like you've got your health and your land, and then all your creatures, and then all of the instants and abilities you're using, and like what's it called, like the stack, which like plays out in reverse order and things. Like Magic is amazing, but KeyForge really benefits from having a really simple kind of basic kind of, I guess you'd say, like sort of turn order in the way you do things.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, KeyForge, the way you're talking here is like you keep noticing new things that you can do to improve the way you play. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Magic, I feel like every time we play, we realize that we were interpreting a rule wrong. So yeah, we notice something new about Magic every time, but it's something that we were supposed to already know.
That's 100% true. Like even once we've been playing Magic for like a couple of years, and then I started playing the online version of Magic Arena, I played that for like a month, and then I remember I came and told you guys, and I was like, these are all the rules that we've been doing wrong for the last few years in Magic. So it does have that complexity to it. But yeah, I guess part of it is that, like you said, it's sort of me realizing new things you can do. I think part of it is also realizing the kind of variety that the game has. And I think one of the things that gives it that is that KeyForge has a really interesting pace to it. We've talked before about how a game of KeyForge is generally longer than a game of Magic. Like, Magic, I think in some ways because Magic kind of counts down in terms of your health, that at a certain point the game is just over. And KeyForge counts up to sort of 3. The first person to forge 3 keys wins. Which, it kind of sounds like it's the same thing, but it's not in a way, because in Magic, you're always losing life. Like every turn, someone's losing a little bit of life and eventually you run out. Whereas KeyForge can go for ages and ages without anyone forging a key.
Yeah, and by virtue of it being like, we're each trying to forge 3 keys, it's very clear kind of like what stage of a game you're in with KeyForge. And in both Magic and KeyForge, like, anything can happen. We've played games of Magic where someone's gone down to 2 points of health and then managed to win the game, taking their opponent all the way down and like sitting there on 2 health. And, you can do the same thing in KeyForge. I can have 2 keys on the go and then get caught from behind. But I feel like just because they're kind of, it feels like chapters or acts when you're working towards that first key.
Hmm.
So you're able to go, all right, now I'm a third through my game, kind of thing.
Right, right. And I think one of the interesting things I've noticed is that the game can speed up very, very quickly. So you can have that, like you say, that kind of real slow build up to sort of forging your first key. But you can also have a game where like someone has two keys and they're on the verge of getting their third, but then the other player manages to forge like two keys in 2 turns, and the first player does win the game, but everyone knows that if that game went for 1 turn longer, the other player would have got there, because it's kind of like the way their strategy played out meant that it was all just kind of building up momentum, and then suddenly they get a huge amount of ember, which is the currency you use, and they would have just been basically forging a key a turn from then on, because they'd got so much stuff on the board, or they had so many abilities that they could use. And I find it's really cool like that. Like you always kind of feel like you could have won, whereas I feel like in Magic more often, and this does happen sometimes in KeyForge, but in Magic I think you often feel like you can get a bad draw from the deck and there's really nothing you could do about it. And that's not something I mind about Magic in a way, because it kind of keeps it balanced in a random sort of way. But yeah, you can get a bad hand and you lose the game, and well, you reshuffle and you go again. Whereas KeyForge always feels like you lose a game, but then you talk about it afterwards, and
Yes.
you don't feel like, oh yeah, I just had a bad hand. You feel like if this one thing had gone differently, I would have won.
Yes, and when you're in that position where you can see the player is about to forge their last key or whatever, like you can spend so long looking at every single one of your cards and being like, okay, if I do this, it stops him from being able to forge that last key this turn, but it doesn't stop him in the long run. Or I can take a risk and try to do this and da 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 da. And like you said, at the end of every game I've ever played, you end up flipping all your cards and going, look at what I had right here. I was about to
Right.
do it.
Yeah, totally, totally. Like I sort of an example of that. I was playing against Moz, and he had a card which meant that my keys cost 1 ember more to forge. So rather than costing 6, they cost 7. Which it's the number is low enough that 1 extra is a big deal in a game of KeyForge. Like it doesn't seem like a lot, but the number of times where I would end a turn with 6 ember rather than 7 in that game. But he was also gaining ember at the same time, and I would have to make those kind of tough decisions, kind of like you're saying to me about like taking a risk or playing it safe. Like, do I try to get that creature off the board so that my keys are cheaper to forge, or do I just try and gain a whole bunch of ember? Like, do I just accept that, all right, mine costs 7 and I just have to make more ember than him? Or do I try and like stem the flow of his ember so he can't forge his keys? And every single one of those options has the positive I just described, but they all have a downside, because if you do any of them, you're not doing the other two. And I feel like you get a lot of those situations where it's like, it's like, do I stop them getting ember, or do I get ember? Or do I deal with that card that's on the board? Or do I play my cards instead that I want to use? And I think the thing that makes that interesting is the KeyForge mechanic, where every deck is 3 houses, but you can only use cards from 1 house a turn. It means you can never do everything, which is really, really interesting. You can have all these cards out on the board, but you can only use, let's say, like 30 or 40% of them at any time. And it means that you have to make a choice, where otherwise in Magic, if you've got enough land, use everything.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, because you have those cards in your hand, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but KeyForge has a draw up phase. Like you always draw back up to your maximum hand size, right? At the end of a turn.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's always showing you how many options you have. You're always going to have more than you can do in your hand, just about. Um, I'm glad you brought up the houses, because I was going to ask. You sent me a couple of screenshot photos when you were playing this with JT, I think it was, and I noticed that you were using the decks in the blue box, which means the kind of the second. I don't want to say expansion, but like kind of their starter set was all in red, and all of the decks came in red, and then they had kind of like the thing called Ascension or whatever, which was all in blue. And I guess they're kind of like seasons, right? They're just kind of
it's like
slight
second edition kind of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned at the start of this that you are always noticing new things every time you play. So I was wondering if any of those new things were coming from playing with different cards to the set that you and I had originally played with. Like, were there new houses and new mechanics that brought in that you're enjoying?
We actually weren't using that one.
Okay.
The reason that box was there is because when we started playing KeyForge, I think you have the box set for the first edition of KeyForge, and then I bought a box set for the second edition. So all my like pieces that you use to play the game, I get out of my second edition box, but I have like 3 or 4 first edition decks that we were using.
Okay, right. All right. Well, I mean, like, that's a good recommendation, right?
Exactly right.
You're still playing with the first stuff. You felt no need to even look at the new stuff, and you're still discovering new things.
Yeah. Like I have 2 decks, I think, that came with that second edition, which I've barely even played with. I think one of them is unopened, and then I have 1 deck from the third edition, which is the purple themed set, which again I haven't even opened and used. And so yeah, it's sort of it's a mark in the game's favor that we're still using the original set decks, and we're finding new stuff all the time. One of the other things that stood out to me from playing these games, and this was more from the game I played against JT, is that my previous take on KeyForge has been that board control is not so important. So it's a huge thing in Magic, you know, whether you're like just having more than your opponent or trying to keep theirs off the field, you know, board control matters a whole lot because those characters defend your health bar, which is the goal of the game, to attack that. KeyForge doesn't have anything like that, so I've always kind of felt like board control is not such a big deal, that you can kind of cede the board to the opponent if you're doing other things. And I had a really interesting game against JT where I massively had board control. I had like 9 or 10 cards out on the field, and he had hardly anything. But they didn't have abilities that I could particularly use because he didn't have a lot of creatures and things like that. But because I had so many cards spread across all 3 houses, I was able to use the Reap ability every single turn to it's a quite devastating effect, which is basically where a card that would otherwise do something else, you basically just tap it and you gain an ember, and that's pretty much it. And I feel like it's like, I don't know if you agree, Timmy, but it's a mechanic that we've always kind of overlooked when we play KeyForge. We kind of always look at it as it's like the last resort. It's, you know, you can attack, you can use abilities, and if you got nothing else to do, you may as well reap. But I played
half the time we forget you can do it.
Right.
The amount of times that we would go, I'm not going to attack with him because I don't want to lose him. I want to keep him for defending, or you know, he doesn't have a very good attack. Rah 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 rah. So that's the end of my turn. The next person starts having their turn. You go, oh my goodness, that vital resource that I need for everything in this game. I could have got more of it for free, and I didn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. But this one game that I played against JT, it really emphasized how important it is to me because I wasn't able to do much else. But just by having that many cards, it was like minimum 3 ember a turn. No matter what house I picked, I would just reap with those cards, get my ember, and it really sort of snowballed towards the end. And I had one of those games where it took me a while to get going, and then I forged like 3 keys in 4 turns towards the end or something like that. And it was really interesting because I then had a game against Moz where we both had a huge amount of creatures on the board, but I don't think they actually fought each other at any point. So you can use an individual creature to attack another creature and try and take it off the board. And we put all these creatures out. We would have had like more than 10 each, but they were all just there using their different abilities. And Moz described it as it was like a Cold War game of KeyForge with both the armies lined up there, but they never actually fought each other. They just sort of did all these tricks to to give Ember to either one of us so we could forge keys. And it was a really interesting game because I felt like, if you've got a lot of creatures out there, they're going to be fighting each other. But they have such varied abilities that there are a lot of creatures who come into play, and it's almost better for them if they don't get into combat, which again is really interesting tactically.
Yeah, it's kind of that mutually assured destruction, right? You don't want to lose your things, so you don't attack their things, and you just use it all for reaping and farming and special tricks and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's a really good game.
It is a good game, and I think I sent a message to you guys after I played with Moz and sort of lamented the fact that I really love KeyForge, but every time we play, it's been long enough since we last played that we say, all right, let's just start with these original decks so that we can kind of get the feel of the game again. And, we played a couple of games of it, and then we stop and say, all right, next time we use the new decks. And then the cycle repeats, right? The gap between that and the next time is long enough, etc. So I would really like to be a bit more proactive about that, because I think among the decks that I have from the newer editions, there are 2 new houses, and each house does kind of have quite a distinct theme. Like some of them are really good at taking damage, and so you kind of put the creatures out and they're very good at defending and doing things like that. Some of the houses are very good at stealing Ember. That's actually the one I really like playing is, you almost need your opponent to start doing well before you can do well. And I'm just interested to see with 2 new houses, what is the theme of those? Like, what are the mechanics that those use? So yeah, I'm going to be bugging JT and Moz probably particularly to get those guys to play a bit more KeyForge so I can try out those decks.
Yeah, see, I introduced Shayla to KeyForge and she really liked it, but she also beat me and has been happy to remain undefeated. So I'm keen to play some more as well.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to mention, which I kind of forgot about, but it was another sort of realization I had while I was playing, is that KeyForge has a very strict turn order, in the sense that you have your turn and you go through sort of the 5 or 6 phases of it, and then it is your opponent's turn and they go through the 5 or 6 phases of theirs. And there is no interaction between those two, unlike in Magic where you have instant cards which you can play at any point that you want, and you can use them to kind of interrupt and counteract your opponent and mess with them and all stuff like that. I quite enjoyed the fact that KeyForge doesn't have those, because it gives you, I think, a little bit more freedom to plan your moves for each turn, because sort of the cards synergize quite well together. If you've got a bunch of cards from a certain house, they'll often work together in a nice way to create a little strategy that you can use in an individual turn. I would find a lot as I got more experienced at Magic that I would hold off from doing that, because I'd be worried, does the opponent have an instant card? Do they have something they're going to use to mess up my play here? Whereas KeyForge, it's kind of nice that if you look at your hand and you've got 3 cards that will really kick ass in the next turn, as long as you get to that next turn, you can do that. And I think it means you can play a bit more assertively rather than having to play more conservatively. And, again, like, I don't want to... This whole thing sounds a little bit like we're saying, like, KeyForge is great and Magic sucks, but, Magic is really good and we all really enjoy that. But I think the reason that KeyForge has kept our attention for this long is because of these differences, rather than it just being a Magic clone. It has things that sets it apart.
Yeah, like, I feel like card game designers have been, like, trying to find those points of difference for so long. Like, Magic has just been the granddaddy of competitive trading card games, right? And so everybody always kind of starts with, well, you need a resource to fund what you can do. So it's like land cards or energy cards if it's Pokemon, or rah, rah, rah. And then, you need to battle each other's, and then, you need to be able to do spells and whatnot. Everything kind of is similar. And it's funny that it's taken the guy who created Magic coming and creating this other game to say, hey, you can have a card game where you are battling each other, but there are enough differences that you're going to have time and willingness to play both of these games. I feel like he's even gone, you know what? I'm never going to convince all of the Magic nerds that I have wrapped around my little finger to stop buying decks and boosters and stuff. So I'll create this game where you get the entire deck and you're not allowed to change it so that they'll still give it a go.
Yeah, the deck is the booster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did promise a bit of non-video game stuff, and that's what I've been playing. But I think you've got some non-video game stuff that we're going to get into in just a minute with you, Timmy.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
So, Timmy, I have fulfilled my half of the bargain for providing our listeners with some long overdue tabletop talk, but you have not been, slacking on your duties either. So, what have you been playing?
Yes, so much like your KeyForge discussion, something that we have mentioned at length before, but had some new thoughts about. Shayla and I have been continuing in our Gloomhaven campaign. For those of you who are perhaps new to the podcast and haven't gone back, Gloomhaven is a massive board game in a giant box that seems very intimidating, but has such good, simple, clean gameplay mechanics that it is a pleasure to play. And 75% of what is in the box you don't open until the game directs you to do it throughout your campaign and journey into this world that is Gloomhaven. So last time we spoke, Paul, I kind of mentioned about, creating characters and how the gameplay works and that kind of stuff. But I wanted to chat with you about it again because we've now played long enough to have unlocked a few things. And the way we've done that is that when you create a character, you get given a life goal. And when you achieve that life goal, you have to retire your character. And so Shayla very begrudgingly retired her character. This is something that nearly put her off playing the game altogether when she found out I'm going to put all this time into a character and then I have to retire it.
I love that. Just
of course,
broadly as a thing, that sounds excellent.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the trade-off is that's how you unlock new things and how you discover more about the world and more characters and stuff. I think it's a great trade-off. And there's nothing to say that once you retire that character, you can't create another one with the same class. But yeah, her fears were quickly swept away because she happened to have picked a life goal. Because what happens is you get dealt 2 cards and you pick the one you feel resonates with you or your character best. And her original character, which was an orchid spellweaver, she picked a life goal that this character wanted to enhance her powers. And so once you are able to afford to apply 4 enhancements to your character, which are little stickers you put on certain cards that can do certain things, her character's like, well, I've done all my research and I've powered myself up and I feel good, so I'm going to retire. And the role that she unlocked is a summoner. So that's her new class, which really, for all intents and purposes, feels like the extension of what her first character was doing. So her Orchid Spellweaver was like really strong, had like very low health, but had all these powerful spells. And one of those spells allowed her to summon a little extra player that she essentially controls when we're in a dungeon, and she can move that around. And he has move and attack and defense. And so you essentially get a second character to control. And this summoner, as the name implies, has many more spells like that, which, that was the most effective spell she had in her arsenal. And now she's unlocked this new character that can do even more of that sort of stuff. So from what I understand, sometimes you'll unlock certain things that change the world and whatnot. This particular quest unlocked a new class, and it happened to follow on really nicely from the character that Shayla had built and put a lot of time into, which was nice.
That moment when you retire the old character, does it give like sort of a narrative reason for that? Because I've always felt like Gloomhaven has that vibe of being it's a bit like playing, a pen and paper RPG, but it's a board game, right? That's kind of the vibe that it goes for. Does when you retire that character, is that just like you reach that goal and then it stops? Like, do you have to try and work that in? Is there a reason like why that happens, or is the reason why the fact that this was their goal and therefore they're stopping?
Yeah, that's essentially it. Like the rule book says in those words, it says once your life goal has been achieved, your character has no drive to continue putting themselves in terrifying, life-threatening situations. They've achieved what they set out to achieve. They've, in theory, racked up money and items and stuff while you've been playing them, and they are happy now to rest out their days and reap the benefits of their questing.
When when the new character then comes in, how is that handled? Is it just like her old character walks out of the door of the room and then the summoner character walks in after, or like how is that handled in some ways?
So there's not like this grand plot thread like you would have with a dungeon master explaining how you've met this other person, right?
Right.
It all happens when you go back to Gloomhaven. So once Shayla was able to achieve her goal, if you go back to Gloomhaven, you must retire. So you could potentially, go from scenario to scenario, just doing road events and avoiding Gloomhaven. You wouldn't be able to buy any items, and you wouldn't be able to do city events and stuff like that. But you could essentially delay the inevitable by not going back to Gloomhaven. So in that sense, you assume that you meet this person in Gloomhaven. You do city events when you're there, and often, you're sitting in taverns or people come up and ask for help and stuff. So it's a little bit fill in the blanks yourself. In this case, because this was the first character we retired, you have to open a little book that was sealed over with a seal in the in the box that's called Town Records. And you flip that open, and it's got a little bit of story in the start of that. And it was our party going to the record keeper for Gloomhaven and say, hey, we want to keep some sort of record for the various mercenaries and heroes and stuff that come through Gloomhaven so we can record their exploits and their glories and stuff. So essentially, it gave us this little bit of story without necessarily saying all of this, that we, as the party that we were playing, want to make sure that our retiring brethren is being remembered. And the person, the records keeper for the town, kind of says, that sounds interesting, but before I help you with that, I'm trying to finish this Histories of Gloomhaven, so I need you to check out these things for me. And so that advances the overall story of the world in Gloomhaven. And then from there, my assumption is that because we're playing a 2-person party, my big Enoch's Brute guy, he needs someone to come with him into the depths of darkness, so it's not too much of a leap in imagination or suspense of disbelief to say that I hooked up with someone new. And certain things happen when you retire characters, like often the town's prosperity can be changed and stuff like that. And so as you play the game, Gloomhaven's prosperity goes up, and the assumption there is that attracts more different kinds of people and merchants and classes to the town. So there's a bit of, like I said, connecting the dots, filling the blanks. It doesn't give you a big piece of dialogue that says you bid farewell to your fellow party member, and then before you know it, someone else has rocked up. But I feel like it's D&D without a dungeon master. So we said as much. Like, we just discussed, all right, well, we would have met at the tavern, or we would have met at, wherever mercenary jobs are handed out, and we've also spoken about, like, if we were to come across an orchid spellweaver in our further journeys through this, I am going to headcanon that is your character that has retired to live in Gloomhaven. Like, they'd still be doing something, right? Something to do with their spells. We've already had to talk to different people in the arcane arts, and so yeah, if we come across that person, that's headcanon for me, and I'm happy to do it.
That definitely works. To be honest, just having it be the character only retires when you go back to Gloomhaven, and that's when you get the other one, is enough. You know, like the fact that it doesn't happen instantly, and there's at least a little bit of kind of gesture towards it happening in a place where it would be realistic to happen, is, you know, that would put me at ease.
Yeah, and this is only the one retiring scenario that we've experienced as well. Like, not every life goal card says unlock this new class. Mine happens to say that as well. So when I retire my character, I'm going to get a new class also. But there are some goals that are like open envelope X or envelope A. And so we've got no idea what's in there. Is this going to be different cards to add to the road and city decks? Just different random events to happen? Is it going to be like a letter from someone with a whole new job? And, we can use that to, you know, introduce this new character that we're about to start or whatever. I'm really excited to see how it continues to unfold and introduce new elements. So I didn't really want to go back through all the ins and outs of Gloomhaven because, like I said, it's simple gameplay, but there is a lot to it, and I feel like we covered it at length. But I wanted to share a little bit about the continuing growth of that game because I think it is really some very clever game design, and I thought it would be cool to chat about.
Do you get any sense of how far through the game you are?
Insofar as we've now opened 3 character class boxes. There are 6 starters, and at least that many more that we don't know what those classes are. The Towns records book that we sliced open, and I mentioned the thing about the record keeper, that had a big stop reading. Don't go past this point until you've achieved this. And that was in the first page and a half. And there's, probably like 10, 12 more pages in that book. We've got 3 envelopes we haven't opened. So I couldn't say for sure how long or give you we're 30% through, but I would say we've got a lot more to do than not.
Right. I was going to say, can you judge it based on what you've opened and what you haven't? But it sounds like,
Yeah.
less than half based on that.
Oh, way less. I'd say less than a quarter, frankly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, we could just continue doing like life quests that are like, you'll achieve this, and the game, and like we might have already, had that particular class unlocked. I don't think the game's going to do that, but the rule book allows for if there's no new life quests, your character can never retires, but you can swap to a new one whenever you want. So if we unlock something, we don't necessarily even need to retire the character. We can just go, I'm going to leave him in Gloomhaven. I'm going to play this one. So in terms of how much have we played, it could go forever. How much have we unlocked? Maybe 10%.
I can't quite remember what this specifically was, but recently I remember hearing, maybe it was from you, that either there has been a big expansion release for Gloomhaven, or there's been like a second edition or a new version or something like that released of it.
It's a sequel. It's called Frosthaven.
Right.
So Frosthaven is a different city. And what has happened is the Kickstarter, because Gloomhaven was originally Kickstarted, so Frosthaven, the Kickstarter has gone live, and the game isn't actually going to come out until next year. So that's been around for a little while, but the game isn't publicly available yet.
Right, okay. And judging by that name, is this going to be set in a city that is in some kind of snowy, icy climate?
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of like arse end of the world. It's not a big bustling medieval city like Gloomhaven. It's like a trading outpost up in the snow. And one cool thing that I was reading about it is that you're actually going to be expanding the city. So in Gloomhaven, you can unlock new scenarios so that the map starts changing from just, Gloomhaven being like a map with all these buildings that you can see. You'll put a sticker down and it says that building there is the warehouse, and then another one saying this is an alchemist's lab, and this is this and that and that and that. But the city is all there. You just don't know the things yet. Whereas it seems like in Frosthaven, from what I was reading, as your prosperity goes up and more people start coming to the city itself is going to get bigger, and there will be merchants there that previously weren't and buildings that weren't there. So it looks like it's a natural succession to an already ambitious game.
I gotta be honest, the stuff that interests me most about these Haven games is the city stuff. Like I'm a sucker for good cities in kind of speculative fiction settings, and it seems like these games go in really hard on kind of making the city a character, in the sense that, they named it after it.
Yeah. See, Gloomhaven is, it's kind of like a notorious city. So, most of your scenarios, I would say 2/3 of the scenarios are you leaving Gloomhaven and going to the surrounding areas and doing stuff. But it all kind of ties back to Gloomhaven. Frosthaven already strikes me as potentially being a little bit more focused on Frosthaven. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's just speculation.
Right.
But yeah, if you look at the board, the map of Gloomhaven is like just up in the corner, and the rest of the map is the broader countryside. So yeah, I don't know if that puts you off a little bit more after you were just saying how much it's the city that interests you, but yeah.
Yeah.
Just setting realistic expectations for you, pal.
Maybe a little. Maybe it does put me off a little, but it probably, from what you said, makes me say that if I'm thinking about playing these, I should hold off and give Frosthaven a go.
Yeah, potentially.
They also sound like games that are so big and so expansive that it would just be unrealistic of me to think, I'll just quickly play Gloomhaven before Frosthaven comes out.
Dude, oh yeah, okay. So yeah, you'll never finish it, but in terms of like sitting down and playing a session, Shayla and I have got set up and packed down to such a fine art at this point. Like, we're able to set up a scenario really quickly these days. I've got the box how I like it now. Like, I alphabetized all of the monster creatures and stuff, and I know where they all are, so I can whip them all out. So yeah.
I have also heard, I don't know if you've done this, but I have heard you can play it all single player, which...
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how much that appeals to me. Like, I feel like board and card game stuff for me, it's inherently social, and I would want it to be that, but it is kind of cool to know that option is there.
There are some that I have played by myself. Elder Sign being one, I think is quite good, but you're right, this game is so big, and then it's so exciting opening new things that I feel like that excitement is a little bit lost without someone else. Like, it's fun reading the scenario stuff out loud and doing the voices and treating it a little bit like a D&D session.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely lose something playing it on your own. And you have to play two characters, I'm pretty sure, if you play it on your own anyway.
Right, okay.
Which, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's not ideal then.
But yeah, I mean, you could absolutely do it. If I was absolutely strapped for someone to do it with and dying to play, I think I would give it a go. But I don't think I would have invested in such a big game if I didn't have anyone to play it with either.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, that's about all I want to say about Gloomhaven this time. If that sounded appealing to you, the listener, and you haven't listened to our first episode about it, it's not too far back, I don't reckon. Go suss out Gloomhaven because it is really worth your time. But Paul, I think we've done our due diligence. I think we have satisfied the non-video game portion of this episode. So why don't you bring us home with one more video game?
So the only other thing that I have been playing in the last couple of weeks is Dawn of War, which is a real-time strategy game. I'm on a bit of a strategy kick at the moment, and it is set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. So I think a few episodes ago I talked about Total War Warhammer. So I've also been on a real Warhammer kick, and kind of disappointingly, there is no Warhammer 40,000 equivalent to the Total War game. That 40k is kind of it's the sci-fi Warhammer setting, whereas the other one is just the standard fantasy setting. And there's never really been a game made that covers sort of all the factions and all of their armies in proper depth. All the Warhammer 40,000 games are kind of very small experiences. It's like a shooter game where you play as a space marine and things like that. So I've gone all the way back to Dawn of War, which is, well, the version I'm playing is from 2008, which is Dawn of War Soulstorm. It was the final expansion to the game that was released. And I am playing Dawn of War 1 rather than Dawn of War 2. And that's partially because Dawn of War 2 also kind of went for that small scale thing. You just play like a few squads, whereas the first Dawn of War, you get that kind of traditional real-time strategy feel where you get to kind of build an army. And that's sort of what I was looking for. So that's why I jumped into this. It was almost like I just wanted my Warhammer fix. But I played this game a lot back in the day. I finished all of the Dawn of War expansions. I think there were 3 expansions plus the base game all up. And I put lots of time into those, obviously like over 10 years ago now, given when they were released. But this is a real-time strategy game, but it's a little bit different to something like, say, Age of Empires and more sort of traditional games like that. It doesn't really have a strong focus on base building. So your base tends to be relatively small, maybe like 3 to 4 buildings, that kind of thing. And you don't build walls or anything like that. And the focus, rather than building your base, is on capturing points around the field. And so you also have no units that gather resources. So again, if you're playing Age of Empires, you go and chop wood. Same in like Warcraft. If it's Command and Conquer, you go and collect Tiberium. In Dawn of War, you gain resources by holding control points, and you take the control points with military units. So it's kind of cool in that it encourages you to be a bit more aggressive, and it forces you to sort of push out across the map if you want to gain resources faster and things like that. So map control is very important in this. It's not the kind of game where you can sit in your corner of the map, build up walls around your base, and just sort of turtle for the whole game, which is heaps of fun. And I have played so many games of Age of Empires where that is what I do, and I have a great time doing it. But Dawn of War is really going for a bit of a different experience, and I think it probably encourages a bit more strategy, because if you're forced to expand, obviously the next logical step is then you have to think, well, where do I expand? And so it forces you to kind of look at the map a bit more closely and say, well, if I hold this point here, I can defend that. But if I hold this point over here, I'm overreaching. And, you know,
does it kind of, sorry to interrupt you here. I'm very excited by what you're describing here. I was just going to ask, does it mean that you're needing to keep your eye on more parts of the map? Like, you know, when you're making your own base in Age of Empires, if you're up in a corner and you're just hanging out and you're just fortifying, you really don't have to scroll too far. You can maybe zoom in on something or whatever, but you're all good. In this, does that mean like you're kind of clicking around more parts of the map to be like, I haven't checked in on that control point in a little while?
Yeah, it does. It has all the sort of the usual kind of things for a strategy game. You know, if you're being attacked, the game sort of tells you, and you get a lot of like, you know, red markers all over your screen flashing. So you know if that stuff's happening. It's not like it can happen and you don't realize. But in a sense, yeah, especially as the game progresses on further and you try to expand more, that definitely becomes a part of it. So you will... I've had games where... I should say there are these sort of normal control points which give you resources, and then there are relics, which are kind of like extra good control points. And if you hold a relic, you can create some special units, plus it gives you resources. So sometimes there'll be a relic, and also the relics are always kind of, you know, they're a little bit further out. They're never quite near your base. I'll go and take a relic because I want to build like a particularly big tank, but to take that relic, I kind of have to move across the map. And if I'm going to hold it, I have to move units there. And if I'm moving units there, they have to move from somewhere else. You know, they can't be everywhere at once. So you can become kind of stretched too thin like that. And one of the other cool things that the game has is it has a relatively strict cap on the number of units you can have. So something like Age of Empires, you can have a cap that's up to like 500 units, which is just ridiculous. And it's so many units, you never really need to do that. Whereas this, I think, has a limit of... It's a bit more difficult to gauge because it goes in terms of squads, and each squad is kind of worth a certain number of points. So you have a cap of 20, and a squad of Space Marines is maybe worth 4. And so, you know, what does that work out to? You can have 5 squads of Space Marines in your game. And each squad can be kind of expanded so they can have like 6 or 7 units in them. So you're never dealing with a huge army. But the point is more being that if you're playing on a very big map, you only have 5 squads to move around and do your defending with, if you know what I mean. And then that is further reduced if you want to build other units, you know? So that's 20 points of like population for all of your infantry. And then you have the same for vehicles. But I think it's a really cool system because it forces you to make that choice. So you can't just build 10 squads of Space Marines and then, you know, 50 snipers and things like that. You'd have to say, no, I'm only going to have 4 Space Marine squads because I want to have a squad of snipers as well. And I've quite enjoyed that because I do feel when I play stuff like Age of Empires, you tend to get into a habit of just, you know, you find the unit you like and then, I don't know, you just build 100 of them and then march them across the map and they destroy everything. But you can't really do that in this. You have to think a little bit more because it puts that limit on you.
Yeah, and it would force you to approach different battles in different ways, right? Like, you would perhaps go that... I haven't played it, so I could be completely wrong, but perhaps somebody else has a certain control point that you want, but they have a troop that is better against the ones that you favored. You know,
right.
Perhaps now you have to go, all right, well, either I need to invest more time changing the makeup of my army, or I go for a different control point for now.
Right. Like that, I guess that kind of rock, paper, scissor thing in strategy games is always really fun. And it's sort of more pronounced here, like you say, because you can't have just 1,000 of anything. That, yeah, if the enemy has a unit which is really good against, say, your standard Space Marines, you can't just build more Space Marines to kind of drown them in that. So it does force you to think a little bit more about it. It has... I was actually really wishing JT was on this episode, because when we talked about Total War Warhammer, he was asking about whether you could design like the colors of the armies as if you were painting them like the tabletop game, and Dawn of War actually does have an army painter. So it's disappointing again that JT may never be on the podcast, because he will never get to hear about the fact that he can live out his Warhammer painting fantasies in Dawn of War.
Well, you know what? While we're talking about, you know, real Warhammer, I need to tell you that Shayla was talking on the phone to a friend recently, and I was able to pick up that she was talking about potentially buying these starter sets from Games Workshop. And I was like, wait a minute. And she got off the phone and I said, so you're looking at getting into Warhammer, huh? And she's like, me? No, we are getting into Warhammer. I'm not doing this on my own. So you and Butters will be pleased to hear that I am being dragged into Warhammer. And when I say dragged, I mean like it was with the flimsiest of resolve that I was preventing myself from adding something new to collect to my list of things I collect.
Yeah,
and
I was gonna
my
say,
fiance goes, we're doing Warhammer. I'm like, oh, well, you twisted my arm.
Yeah, I can imagine you really needed convincing.
Nope, not really. So that's going to be fun. Because actually, and this ties into Gloomhaven as well, we took to painting our character pieces when we unlocked them, because we were like, well, we only have 2 because we haven't unlocked anything else, so we can take the time to paint them. It's not like they'll stand out against other non-painted pieces if we only do ours. And that was actually quite fun. I really enjoyed that. So I can see myself getting into Warhammer and enjoying that just like JT does.
Yeah, I guess the reason that I've been getting into these games recently, like Dawn of War and Total War, is because, like I said, I've been sort of really into Warhammer, been like reading some of the books and things like that. But the tabletop hobby, as much as I'd love to get into it, it's not even the money, it's the time. You know, it's just like I don't know if I can fit another time-consuming hobby into my life. So I think I'm going to have to find a more streamlined way to scratch that itch, which is how I've ended
Yeah.
up playing these games.
Yeah, fair enough. See, I think like I don't think I'm ever going to invest the massive amount of time that like somebody who loves Warhammer would. But if my fiance and I both have a set that we can whip out and play every now and again, I'm fine with that. That way I can scratch that itch when we're both in the mood, and then I'm not feeling like I'm painting these pieces and buying extra stuff and then never doing anything with them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of small scale options now that are available that really weren't around when I used to play Warhammer when I was younger. Like they've kind of diversified the offerings they have so that if you want to get into it on a level where you paint 5 guys and you can have sort of a fully fleshed out game of Warhammer with that, there are entire games that are based around small scale like that. The big army stuff where the barrier to entry is $2,000 to even get in the door. That stuff is still there, but it's no longer the only way into the hobby, which is really cool. I'm just concerned about the fact that those are gateway drugs of the worst kind.
Warhammer, not even once.
But yeah, back to Dawn of War just briefly. I've just been kind of messing around with that. Like I haven't really been going through anything in it in terms of the campaign. I've played the campaign in Soulstorm before. Soulstorm, sorry. It's got a kind of cool structure. It's a little bit like a Total War game in that you have a turn-based map where you choose what to attack. And I always kind of like that. It's not just a sort of linear string of battles. You get to say like, I'll attack this province, and then you play that as a real-time strategy mission. But I've just kind of been messing about with it. I've just sort of been going into skirmish games and like setting up matches against factions that I want to fight, playing as factions that I'm kind of been reading about or watching YouTube videos about. And yeah, it's just sort of like wanting to be in the Warhammer world for a bit. And
Yeah.
Dawn of War is sort of doing it best for me, which, like I said at the start, it's made me think that there is absolutely a space for a really decent Warhammer 40k game which kind of covers that whole universe rather than just little bits of it. So I don't know, there's nothing that I know of that is being made that's gonna sort of fill that niche, but I would love to see it happen.
Yeah, I could get behind it as well. Like Space Marines is something I know nothing about, but I've always thought is like pretty cool, and it's got a lot of really striking imagery, and I could very easily get into it if it was, presented in the right format for me.
Right. I guess in terms of a strategy game, the fantasy setting does make things a bit easier because, you don't have to deal with like lasers and enormous guns and things flying in space like you do in the sci-fi setting. But, game developers are smart. They can figure something out. Just make the game I want.
Rude that they haven't already, frankly.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been playing. Doing a bit of Dawn of War. I probably won't continue with it. That's probably like, I probably kind of got my fill of that and I'll move on to other things. But it's been nice to go back to that game. Like I said, it's from 2008. In some ways, it looks incredibly dated when you get up close to things. But in other ways, it actually kind of holds up quite well. So yeah, that's always interesting to go back to something that you remember playing and seeing what it looks like now. But I think that is pretty much all the games that you and I have been playing, Timmy. And with no one else here to talk about their games, that's probably going to be it for this episode of Disc and Dice. A little bit shorter than we normally do, but there's nothing wrong with that.
We've had a couple of really long ones recently, so we're evening it out with this.
That is very much true. But before we do wrap this up, we always give a little mention to the things that we're looking to play before our next episode. So have you got anything interesting planned?
Yeah, I have actually been getting really back into Zelda Breath of the Wild because I never finished it. It's one of those games that's so big that like it feels very daunting, and it's so open. You can do anything at any time that like it's hard to know how far through it you are really. So I kind of put it down ages ago, but my boys have been getting into watching YouTubers do Let's Play of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and they know that there's 2 Switches and 2 copies of that game in the house, so they've been getting fired up a lot, and they're pretty young, probably too young for that game, really. So a lot of the time they come up against someone and they say, "Oh, quick, Tim, can you help me fight this guy?" I'm like, "Yep, no worries." And they'll be like, "How do I get this kind of arrow? Or how do I cook this kind of food?" And just in doing all those things, it reminded me like what I loved about that game. And so I've been firing up my save, and I've been playing heaps, and I'm actually getting through it. And like me and Grayson have kind of combined now. Like we kind of share my save because he's content just to explore and find stuff, and he's finding all this cool stuff all the time. And then when it comes to me, I'm like advancing the story and finding new spots to do things in. So Zelda has taken up a lot of my time, and that'll probably be what I play most before the next episode. What about you?
Just quickly on Zelda.
Oh yeah,
was there some like expansion release for that, or is that like yet to come? I remember seeing something.
They've announced a sequel to Breath of the Wild.
That might be it.
I get the feeling that there might have been an expansion that I'm forgetting about, though. I'm certain I've seen something about an expansion pass.
Okay.
For it. So, like I said, it's so big. I do not care about getting any DLC for that game at this point. But yeah.
Yeah, I saw a friend playing that recently in the last couple of months, and I'm always kind of blown away by just how gorgeous that game looks. With the kind of the stylized art style and what on a really quick glance kind of looks like relatively sort of flat textures. They do so much with it, and it looks so gorgeous. And I've got that Switch sitting there, and all I've really played is Pokemon. So someday that's got to be a must play, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, you've got a Switch now. It occurred to me that it is almost certainly my favorite Switch game, and I bought that Switch specifically for Pokemon, like knowing that Pokemon was going to be on Switches from now on. I went out and got it, but yeah, much as I love the latest Pokemon games, Breath of the Wild I think it is gonna be like a high point in this era of gaming, like especially for what the Switch can do, and the Zelda franchise in general. People are going to talk about this one for a while. But yeah, what about you? What are you? 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 What about you? you? What are you? What about 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 you? What are you? What are you? What about you? What are you?